Okay, hi everyone. So I'm so excited. We're into week 4, and let me get this a little bit bigger on the screen here for you so you can see. We have a couple chapters that we're doing this week. Some are really short and self-explanatory, and again, just meant to kind of give you an overview into poetry. And some will go a little bit more deeper into, especially, if you started reading these chapters, you've noticed that a lot of them are talking about these perennial themes of poetry, and that's focusing on like love and relationships and sort of a lot of evoking of emotions, which is often some of the first places that people go when thinking about the poetry. So I'll start here. Our chapter 18 in our text by Kawa is really short. This is a look at some more formal structures of limericks and double dactyls. It's so fun to say those 10 times over again. So we talked about a lot of people knowing what a limerick is, what makes a tool for continuing our study of rhyme and meter. We've talked a little bit about this last time with rhyme scheme and meters of limericks and what they're made up of in terms of iambs and anapaests. So here I would say to go through and just to look at marking up a poem in line if you didn't get to do this from last time. And sort of, it can be kind of fun composing and writing your own limerick. Maybe that could be one of our other exercises we do. I know I've tried and sometimes it's been a little stressful to put some of the sequences together, but it is kind of fun. And I think limericks take me back to sort of being like, as a kid and kind of throwing these words and these phrases around. And so if you didn't get to look at these yet, definitely go through. Chapter 19 sort of piggybacks, not to go from the other side, sort of piggybacks off of that and talks about more pleasures of form and rhyme. And that's sonnets and villanelles. Villanelles, really. So how you want to kind of approach these in our chapter here. This right here to start us off, how Annandale went out. The sonnet right here, they called it Annandale, and I was there to flourish, to find words and to attend. Liar, physician, hypocrite, and friend, I watched him, and the sight was not so fair as one or two that I had seen elsewhere. An apparatus not for me to mend, a wreck with hell between him and the end. Remained of Annandale, and I was there. I knew the ruin as I knew the man. So put the two together, if you can, remembering the worst you know of me. Now view yourself as I was, on the spot, with a slight kind of engine. Do you see? Like this. You wouldn't hang me? I thought not. So the sonnet here is by Edwin Arlington Robinson. It's definitely a dramatic monologue because you have someone who's narrating that's not necessarily the poet, and they're addressing not necessarily the reader, but someone very specific. Here the speaker is a physician. He's explaining why he euthanized his friend. He might be addressing a judge, a police officer, someone else in higher authority. That's like kind of for us to figure out. You can see the rhyme scheme of the sonnet, and this one's a little bit more evident here, especially when you read it out loud. It also characterizes this poem as what we call an Italian sonnet, or what is sometimes referred to as its other name as a Petrarchian sonnet. And that's characterized by this ABBA rhyme scheme for the sort of pairing that comes after that too. It has a rhyme scheme for the sestet as long as it's based on 3 rhyme pairs and avoids a final rhymed couplet. I know there's a lot of rules here. It's just part of the definition to kind of remember at. There's others that you can identify that sort of has the same part of it too. We also talk about end-stopped and enjambled lines, and that's when a line of poetry ends at the end of a phrase or sentence. So it very much, when you're speaking it, comes to a natural pause, and we say that the line is end-stopped. Every single one of the lines except the 4th line is end-stopped, and almost all the lines end with a piece of punctuation, and that just tells the reader, just like in regular pieces of writing, what's a phrase, a clause, or a sentence. So we look at those natural pauses at the end. The 4th line is what we call enjambled. The sight was not so fair as one or two that I had seen elsewhere. It's all one phrase, so that you only pause very briefly at the word fair, to feel that emphasis there. Enjambment is a really cool tool for like muting the regularity of metered verse, and it allows a phrase to kind of run over into the next line and almost make it appear like it has more of a more like very much flow to it, and the rhyme becomes a little less noticeable. The other parts that come in with rhyme in the sonnets here is the rhetorical structure of the sonnet. The sonnets are often divided thematically in the octaves. So you have the first 8 lines, which give you like the premise, the sestet, the final 6 lines. They turn the poem by commenting on the situation and or whatever's presented. And so here's how he broke up this above. And the other parts that come into this are masculine and feminine rhymes. So Robinson in the above sonnet chose relatively simple rhymes for the poem. They're all either perfect rhymes or each rhyme mate has the same vowel and consonant sound. Like you can definitely pick out the rhymes in here. Most of the rhymes that we see are called masculine rhymes. They take their rhyme sound on the final syllable, the rhyme word. So here, you know, how often the words are found in 1-syllable words. All the rhymes are masculine rhymes. And that happens for some of the other poems that have been included in ones that you'll see. Feminine rhymes are rhymes that take the rhyme sound on the next to the last syllable of the word or phrase, sometimes an accented syllable. So to rhyme the word better with letter would be using like a feminine rhyme because each of these words rhymes it's next to the last syllable. So again, those are just kind of some other definitions. If you look in some other poems, you'll find rhyme that's carried, you know, like carried and married, or that's another example, immutable, irrefutable, inscrutable. Sometimes you have double feminine rhymes as well. So, you know, it's other ones to kind of look at and look at kind of those parts that sort of come up with that too. You could have, you know, other words that sort of rhyme, like in Ogden Nash poem, the word dimly rhymed with simile. Dimly is a feminine rhyme with simile, and that's sort of a double feminine rhyme mate because of the 2 syllables. Longevity and brevity are kind of one. Tennyson, venison. So it really does kind of take you back to like when you're learning in sort of grade school, and like it very much makes you pronounce everything out loud much more. So you can look at the different models. You know, I won't say all of these are easy to kind of, you know, as he talks about the pleasures and pitfalls of rhymes, sometimes people get really caught up in the rhyme patterns and, you know, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The villanelle, just as rhyme forces the mind into unfamiliar patterns, so too does any formal structure. So the below here is an example of a villanelle, and that's a form that is much more limited than the sonnet in terms of possibilities. So Steve Kowitz put the grammar lesson for D. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does, an adjective is what describes the noun. In the can of beets is filled with purple fuzz, of and which are prepositions. The's an article, a can's a noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. A can roll, or not. What isn't was or might be, might meaning not known yet. Our can of beets is filled with purple fuzz is present tense, while words like our and us are pronouns. An example, it is moldy, they are icky brown. A noun's a thing, a verb's a thing it does. Is a helping verb, it helps because filling isn't the full verb. Can's what our owns in our can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. See? There's almost nothing to it. Just memorize these simple rules or write them down. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. The can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. Whew, if I didn't say that 10 times fast. So up here, the villanelle contains not only a strict rhyme scheme, but refrains. So you have entire lines that are repeated at certain intervals. So in a poem of 19 lines, the first is repeated as the 6th, the 12th, the 18th, and back and forth. And I know this kind of looks like a math equation, so bear with us here, but that's just sort of how if you designate the refrains and what it will kind of look like here. So there's a couple different exercises. You could totally play with these, and maybe we'll even try our hand. I think the easiest to try our hand at is a sonnet, and maybe even a villanelle to kind of do that as well too. To look here, I won't go too into detail with a crib sheet of English meters because a lot of this is just you reading and kind of looking at the most common meters here. The spondee and the perfect foot. So in terms of stressing the syllables, we won't do a ton of work with these, but especially if you are reading a lot of, going back and reading English poetry ever, even some of the poems that we might read for us this week, this is a good place to kind of look and designate and look at the accents, the syllable, the verses. So I think you should go back and just kind of, look at and memorize some of these definitions. Not not having a test, nothing like that. Just, I think it's just good to know when you're looking at poetics, especially looking at the meter. So that's really what that chapter is made of. We already discussed chapter 21 with line breaks. If you want to go back and reread anything from here, you totally can. But I won't bore you with doing these notes on that again. Just to kind of, I think at this point you've got line breaks down because you've been doing so much in terms of the poetry before. So I'll just, preface this in accent as we're going into these other chapters here, the latter chapters of the book, in terms of talking about the perennial themes of poetry here. The body politic, he starts us off in this chapter, chapter 22, with a lovely quote by Walt Whitman that agonies are one of my changes of garments. I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I become myself the wounded person. My hurts turn livid upon me as I lean on a cane and observe. So, very much, and we have the burning of books to start us off here as one of the poetry selections he picked. It is the writer's job to bear witness to the truth and to really think deeply, to very much be a critical reader, a critical writer, and seek their own counsel and not so much adopt propaganda of leaders or, very much, I like to say, very much follow your own intuition. But of course, there's a lot of times where writers, we are so greatly influenced about what is going on around us. And that's not just limited to writers who are writing essays or who are writing nonfiction or fiction pieces. This is so greatly influenced by poetry. We ourselves have a poet laureate in our country, and we have, many of these as we've had for years and years and years. And we're going to read more about that this week. But it's very much interesting to see how we are represent ourselves versus what comes off of our representation from what's going on just in the world. So some examples of this: Salman Rushdie, who is a huge poet, huge writer, lives in hiding because a novel of his offended Orthodox fundamentalist religious group. You have other writers who were persecuted for their own religious beliefs, and of course this is going back in time a bit, but freedom of speech should not be taken lightly. Freedom of the written word should not be taken lightly, because there have been a great deal, as we know, of groups over the years who do try to censor what comes out and what is written. And that's still true today. People still try to dissuade kids. They try to dissuade others from reading certain authors or certain books that might focus on certain themes. Now, it's one thing to censor and wait until maybe someone's a little older to read something, but it's another thing to censor to sort of exclude a group from what you're reading. So there's a lot of groups in the United States that make sure that we can have the privileges of reading, but equally there's also groups in the United States who want to ban a lot of good authors. We have an entire week called Banned Books Weeks that celebrates, freedom of reading. But yeah, even such big authors here: Mark Twain, Maya Angelou, J.D. Salinger, Harper Lee, any big name you can think about, their writing has been challenged. So to talk about this a little bit more here, it's really interesting to kind of put your perspective into how poetry can really also live up to sort of these challenges. So in my next set of notes, I'm just going to go through a couple of these and talk to you a little bit about that, because I think so much, especially of what goes on in our countries and our world right now, we really seek out words to help us feel better and to relate and to understand what's going on. And the idea of not being able to do that is really, really scary.